Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTGO codes, go ahead and check out the Poketown store. You can even get yourself a nice 5% discount on your orders using that OmniPoke code. For today's video, we are going to be looking at Alolan Ninetales. It's a sort of budding archetype from the new set. Pretty interesting, trying to be a zero energy sort of attacking deck is always one that sort of catches the eye. When you don't need to play a bunch of energy cards to use your attacks, it means you can dedicate those spaces to other things, and that's what we're going to be doing today. So, the basic concept is that this Alolan Ninetales attacks for free, so we have a lot of space for tools, and we need a lot of tools because that's the main reason why, well, it's the multiplier for Ninetales' damage output, so we are forced to play a bunch of tools, basically in the place of energy cards, but tools are more useful than energy in many occasions, especially when we have so many Fairy Charms available for this Alolan Ninetales. So think of like all those energy spaces that you would have to commit, now you get to put them into sometimes more effective options for us, which is pretty cool. On top of that, we have Zebstrika. Gives us great means of discarding a bunch of stuff, and at the same time helps us stamp proof and also just dig in general so that we don't just have turns of doing nothing. So that's always a pretty nice thing to have. And when Zebstrika is this synergistic, it just makes sense for us to shove a bunch into the list. So let's get into those Pokemon. It is all based around the new Alolan Ninetales. It has, like I said, a free attack cost of Dust Blizzard, doing 10 times the amount of tools in your discard pile. This is kind of similar to the old like Rotom thing that had Rotomotor, where you had to have 9 tools in the discard pile, but if you did, you could start doing like 120 on the regular Rotoms. Now we have a times 10 multiplier instead, so we're still going to try and get, 10 plus tools or something like that into the discard pile ASAP, so we're going to be doing like a reasonable damage output most of the time. We are a fairy type, which is reasonable, especially because Reshiram is a budding archetype from the set as well, so definitely something to bear in mind. We're maxing out copies of this and the new Alolan Vulpix. The Alolan Vulpix has the Snowed In ability that says, as long as it's on the bench, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks, so that's pretty awesome. Just a built-in little protection against some sniping attacks, which is pretty decent. I think it's better than the other options that we have. There are some that could do like Raw, and like there are some that could do Powder Snow for like sleeping plays, but we no longer have Beacon anymore, which is a bit of a shame. So on the top line, you can see we have Jirachi, Blitzle, and Zebstrika, all in 3 counts, just for the consistency. I've already mentioned how good Zebstrika is for this deck, but the Jirachi also is nice for getting us into early searching options via supporters, as well as digging out Adventure Bags. Adventure Bag is a key focal point of the deck. As soon as we can find those, we can pull out the relevant tools for us in the matchup, as well as just getting tools in general that we can then bin off with things like Sprint or whatever else as well. So Jirachi is a really nice card, especially in those early turns for sure. We have Ditto Prism, just because it can become that 5th Vulpix or an extra Blitzle out. And we are playing 1 copy of Frost Rotom. I've mentioned that Rotomotor ability. They are still in format, and the Frost Crush does 10 plus 20 more times the amount of energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. I think it's their active. I've actually covered up the attack. It might be all of their Pokemon, I can't remember, but the entire point is that you're hitting for weakness against Charizard. There's a new Breakzard and there's Reshizard. Both of them can play a bunch of healing, so would otherwise be a really awkward matchup for this Ninetales, which does relatively weak damage. So having the Frost Rotom to make up for that is definitely a big deal, so definitely something to bear in mind. Also, there's a bunch of like Heatran running around, even in things like Blacephalon and stuff, and Ability-Zard if that's still going to be an archetype. Volcarona as well, so definitely a decent attacking option that we have here. We move on to the trainers, starting off with 2 copies of the new Great Catcher. You can discard 2 from hand and then switch one of your opponent's benched GX or EX with their active. This is pretty decent. Again, we're never really one-shotting stuff, so picking things up that we've hit like earlier on in the game is important. And of course, we have Shrine of Punishment here as well. So hopefully, with enough tools in your discard pile and with the reuse of Shrine a couple of times, you might be able to pick off things like Dedenne. Honestly, our damage output is pretty weak, and I think it is one of the big reasons why I believe this archetype will end up being more rogue, but the Shrine plus the Great Catchers does help us catch up on things like Dedenne. We only have space for a couple Pokécoms. Honestly, I'd like more, but we do have to commit a bunch of space to these tools because we want Ninetales to be doing reasonable output. I've already mentioned how important Adventure Bag is, allowing us to search the deck for 2 tools. It's just obvious. It can get us Giant Bombs, which can like instantly discard themselves. Well, the following turn they discard themselves for free, which is pretty decent. Or you can just get more things like before using a sprint or whatever. And of course, it can get you the right charms for the right occasion as well. We play 4 Acro Bike, just general digging. Hopefully you're hitting tools at the same time. We have 4 a skateboard, obviously working off Jirachi, and to stop your opponent trying to stall any of your things, which is decent. Obviously, because we don't max out copies of Jirachi, we can still use things like Professor Oak's setting, and because we have 4 skateboards and 1 energy in the deck, we still have ways to get into the Jirachi turn 1, even if we didn't start with it, which is decent. The 4 giant bombs, again, they help out against Charizard decks, because both of the Charizard's outputs are 180 plus, so the bombs really come in handy there, and they can come in handy in some other situations as well, but mostly the Charizard matchup, I would say. 2 ear-ringing bell, again, we're in that 2-shot range, so when we're doing that, sometimes putting the ear-ringing bell on is the best tool for us. Again, looking towards things like Guardian, where the charms aren't helpful, Charizard, and a few other matchups like that. The ear-ringing bell is probably going to be the most handy one you can use whenever there's not a charm available. So this is like the non-charm, like the 4th charm basically to the deck. For whenever these other ones aren't helpful, the bell goes on. We then have 2 lightning charm, mainly for Pikarom. We have 2 ability charm, pretty decent for Mewtwo of course, and a few other ability-based attackers out there, and we also have 2 Ultra Beast charm as well for Blacephalon mostly, so definitely decent options there for some coverage. We only play like 2 copies of each of these, and of course they will sometimes play non-GX attackers or other things that can help get through you, but we also play Diantha in the deck, don't forget, so we can reuse these if it's the right matchup. So that's why we're only sticking to 2 copies of each of these, because hopefully we can reuse them to really cause headache for the opponent. We then have 2 copies of Shrine. I think it's actually a super important card as well. I kind of want to bump this up to 3 if I can find room, because it's a big contributor for our damage output, because realistically, it's not going to be easy for you to get like 10 tools in the discard pile like by turn 2 or 3. If any of you have played Rotom before, you will know that getting 9 into the discard pile turn 2 is somewhat of a mission, so we're really looking towards like hitting like 70 or so like by turn 2. Sometimes that's good enough for knocking out like Jirachis and other things, but if it's against like tag teams or whatever, you're really going to need the help of like Shrine and other things to really get you into range, so I really do think that Shrine's an important card. Onto the supporters, Diantha is in the deck. This is our means of Pokemon recovery, as well as extra Great Catchers, as well as extra Shrines, as well as extra tools if it's the right matchup for the Fairy Charms, for example. I really do think she's versatile and very strong in this deck, because right now our other options for like Pokemon recovery in general is like Brock and Lana's Fishing Rod, which are both kind of slow. So I'd rather have Diantha because she's so versatile, very, very flexible card that can really help get all sorts of things back. That's why I'm slightly okay with only playing 2 Great Catcher and only 2 Shrine, because we're going to try and reuse them if it is important. We then have 4 copies of Hapu, fantastic discard synergy supporter of course, as well as picking out some key pieces for us. There's really not much that you like don't mind getting rid of in the deck. I guess it's like only Pokemon really that you're worried about getting rid of, especially like the Ninetales pieces in general, maybe like picking out Dianthas from your Hapu, but you're actually using Hapu mostly for the discard effect, believe it or not, so yeah, you're just trying to thin out as much as you can. And then we have 4 copies of the new Professor Oak setting. I'm super hyped on this card. I think he's really insane. Helping us get Jirachi early, just to pivot into. Can get us Ditto, Blitzle, Alolan Vulpix, which is just phenomenal, of course. So it really helps us get going, because I really do think that Sprint is the focal point of the deck. We don't get going until Zebstrika's hit the board, so Oak getting those multiple basics down is going to be a big deal for us for sure. And then we play 1 energy card in the list, Recycle Energy. This means that we can get around Absol a lot easier with our Jirachi specifically, and just in general, if people are going to try and trap stuff, we have the Recycle that can infinitely like get us out of the 1 retreat cost Zebras or the like other Pokemon that we have on the board. So yeah, the Recycle Energy is just a nice addition to have here. Also is like a 5th escape board in terms of retreating into a Jirachi on like turn 1 if we need to, which is pretty cool. For the full list then, you can find it down below as well, but do take your screenshot now if you want to take note of it. For the tech options, I mentioned that Diantha is a super important card for getting back like Pokemon at times, especially if Hapus sort of go haywire, if Acro Bikes don't go your way, or if you just have to sprint when you have excess pieces. And to sort of defend against that a little bit better, you could go down the Lana's Fishing Rod route in addition to the Dianthas, just giving you a bit more of a safety net. I can definitely see that being a thing. In terms of stadiums, I have mentioned how important Shrine is for damage output, but if you're more worried about people using labs to get around your fairy charms, you might want to look at Chaotic Swell instead and just say that your matchups get weaker against more general matchups, but if you're up against something where the charms are effective, the Chaotic Swell is going to be great, and it really will increase your win rate. You just slow and steady, just make sure that your charms take over the game. Even if it's just one Chaotic Swell in this list as like the third stadium, it could also help you win out that war against labs, and then you're going to have a much better time against them. Metal Core Barrier, very similarly to Giant Bomb, discards itself at the end of the turn, so it does accelerate your damage, and it's something that I played in Rotom for sure to make sure that you could get Plasma Slicing on turn 2. So at the moment we're playing the Ear-Ringing Bell and a bunch of charms, but if something like Ultra Beasts become less relevant, you could just flip-flop those out for Core Barriers for sort of, in air quotes, faster tools that find their way into the discard pile much quicker for your damage output. Speaking of Rotom, even though this is a predominantly Ninetales deck, you could definitely squeeze in one copy of this card. If we're already playing Shrine, you can just have the surprise factor of hitting for weakness against a Mewtwo and helping that coverage out a little bit better. I think right now, because we already have the Ability Charm, I don't think Mewtwo is like the most difficult matchup for us if we are using our Diantha effectively to make life difficult for them. So I don't think Rotom is mandatory for the deck, but it definitely can be an option. And we also have the option of the other Ninetales, of course. You might want to squeeze in a few more energy cards, of course, but this Ninetales could be additionally annoying. There are some matchups like Guardian and Breakzard, which might be very difficult at the moment, but can be completely turned on their head if you just have the Luminous Barrier at your side. So do bear that in mind also. Onto that matchup overview, I just mentioned Guardian as a difficult one, that's for sure, just because they have a lot of healing, and none of the charms are that effective. They play a bunch of switches and tag switches to get around the Ear-Ringing Bell and stuff, so I really think Guardian should be pretty awkward. Malamar, as always, they have the boast of Distortion Door plus Spell Tag to help outrace, and we really don't have many options. It should be very difficult for us to hit 130 turn 2. We have to have high rolled pretty well to be able to keep up with Giratina damage output. Dark Box has the Guzzlord, which is a super annoying card and will really just run riot over us, in my opinion. Behemoth and Florsbuck, we don't have great options against the Lily's Dolls, so that's a big problem. And also there's the Gallade deck, which I think will act very similarly to Malamar, in that they have spell tags that they can reuse, especially with like Lana's Fishing Rods and stuff, so they'll basically be like a Malamar, but instead of 130 hit points, they have 160, which is even harder for Ninetales to reach. So yeah, that kind of brings us to the closing thoughts. There is the Malamar effect here, still being ever present for a bunch of non-GX decks, being the gatekeeper in air quotes. Is definitely something that this deck feels more than most. I really think Malamar will be a tough matchup for you. We don't have many answers. Usually the answer to any Malamar matchup is fitting in Hoopers and Labs, but this deck really does not want to play Lysander Labs for sure. And you don't want to play Hooper either, because he takes up energy cards, and you don't really want to commit to like more than 2 Recycle Energies, I would say. Because that all eats into your overall tool count, which is definitely a big problem. So yeah, Malamar definitely being a bad matchup. Also, I do just think that this limiting factor is the damage at the end of the day. If it was, a 20 multiplier, the card would be insane, but it kind of has to be insane if it wants to compete, because a ×10 modifier just warps your deck. Like, I really feel like we can't fit many more tools into the list without hurting consistency even more. Like, realistically, you could probably trim down the Zebstrika line, or you could get rid of the 2 Pokecom that I play just for like 2 more tools to hope that you can reach a little bit higher. But overall, I think the reach of the deck is definitely an issue, and you definitely need to get Zebras down as quickly as possible, start finding adventure bags, because you're ultimately going to be a little bit slow, and I think if you're going to win a lot of matchups, it's going to be down to these charms working. And if you are going to be playing the Alolan Ninetales deck just for the reason of charms alone, you could look towards Guardian instead. That's my honest opinion. I do think this is probably going to fall short of the mark, mostly because of that Malamar issue. and because Guardian seems to go on in leaps and bounds in this set, just because Tag Whistle Engine is busted. So yeah, I think overall the Alolan Ninetales deck will be a fun rogue, but no more than that unless the format gets very strange and in a spot where Guardian for some reason isn't strong, yet the Fairy Charms are for some strange reason. Answers on a postcard down below why that could be the case. So yeah, that's going to be it today, guys. Hope you enjoy this video. Let me know how you guys are going to try and play Alolan Ninetales. We'll get the discussion rolling. For now, it has been Joe from OmniPoke, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Cheers.